My name is Eleanor. I'm 32 years old, and to my parents, I was always a failed investment. They dragged me into a courtroom to strip me of my last possession, but they're about to find out that I've been hiding a secret net worth with 8 zeros, and they aren't getting a single cent. The salt air always smelled like lavender and old books when I was with Grandma Rose. Now, standing in her tiny kitchen in Maine, the lavender was fading, replaced by the sterile scent of dust and silence. I ran my hand over the scarred oak table. Every notch told a story. The time I dropped a jar of jam when I was 6, the rhythmic clicking of Rose's knitting needles. This house wasn't just wood and shingles, it was the only place I had ever felt truly safe. "Eleanor, are you actually crying over this dump?" The voice hit me like a splash of ice water. I turned to see my mother, Margaret, standing in the doorway. She was dressed in a beige trench coat that cost more than my monthly rent, or at least the rent she thought I paid. Her eyes swept over the peeling wallpaper with a look of pure disgust. "It's not a dump, Mom," I said, my voice thick. "It's home." "It's a liability," my father Harold grumbled as he pushed past her. He was checking the corners for mold, his face twisted in a permanent scowl. "Rose was senile to leave this to you. What are you going to do with it? Paint more of those little digital doodles? You can't pay property taxes with likes on the internet." I bit my tongue. For years, they had viewed my career as a failed hobby. They saw the paint-stained hoodies and the modest apartment in Seattle and assumed I was one missed paycheck away from the street. They didn't know about the lines of code I wrote until 4 a.m. or the software company VividFlow that was currently revolutionizing the design world. To them, I was just their difficult daughter who refused to get a real job in corporate law. "I'm keeping it," I said firmly. "I'm moving my studio here for the summer." My father laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "With what money? Eleanor, look at us. Your mother and I have had a difficult year. The market was volatile. We've had to downsize." "Downsize?" I glanced at the diamond glinting on my mother's finger. "You still live in a penthouse." "For now," Margaret snapped, her facade slipping, "but we deserve a comfortable retirement. We raised you. We put clothes on your back. This cottage is worth at least $500,000 for the land alone. We sell it, we split it, and everyone wins." "Grandma left it to me," I whispered. "She knew you'd sell it the second the dirt hit her casket. I'm not selling." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father stepped toward me, his shadow looming over the old oak table. "You've always been selfish, Eleanor, but don't think for a second we're going to let you sit on an asset like this while we suffer. We spent a fortune on you growing up. Consider this the bill coming due." He didn't hug me goodbye. He didn't offer condolences for his own mother's death. He just turned on his heel and walked out, leaving me alone in the fading scent of lavender. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time they would ever speak to me as a daughter. From that moment on, I was just a target. The letter arrived 3 weeks later. I was sitting on the porch of the cottage, a mug of black coffee warming my hands against the damp Maine mist. The mailman didn't even look me in the eye when he handed over the thick, cream-colored envelope. It looked expensive. It looked like trouble. I tore the seal. The words "Notice of Filial Support and Restitution" jumped out in bold, aggressive font. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. It wasn't just about the cottage anymore. My parents were suing me for the cost of my upbringing. They had itemized everything: private school tuition from 15 years ago, dental work, summer camps, even the estimated value of room and board from when I lived at home during college. The total was staggering: $450,000. My phone buzzed on the wooden railing. It was a text from my mother. "We tried to be reasonable, Eleanor. If you won't sell the house to help your family, we'll take the equivalent in assets. Don't bother calling. Talk to our lawyer." I leaned back, the old wicker chair groaning under me. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. They didn't want restitution. They wanted a pound of flesh. They thought they were cornering a mouse. They thought that by hitting me with a $500,000 lawsuit, I'd be forced to liquidate the cottage just to pay for a defense attorney. I looked at the screen of my laptop sitting on the cable. A notification popped up from my CFO. "Quarterly dividends finalized, Eleanor. $1.2 million headed to your private holding account. Let me know when you want to announce the new UI update." The contrast was dizzying. In one tab, I was a deadbeat daughter being sued for the cost of her childhood braces. In the other, I was the woman holding the keys to the fastest-growing design suite in North America. I could have ended it then. I could have sent them a check and told them to vanish. But a cold, hard knot was forming in my chest. If I paid them now, they would never stop. They would see me as a golden goose to be plucked whenever their bank accounts ran dry. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had kept in my contacts for years, hoping I'd never have to use it. "Marcus?" I said when the line picked up. "It's Eleanor. My parents just served me. I need the best litigator in the state. No, I don't want to settle. I want to go to discovery. I want them to bring every single receipt they think they have." "Eleanor," Marcus, my corporate counsel, sounded concerned. "If we go to trial, your financials become part of the record. Your anonymity goes out the window." I looked out at the Atlantic Ocean, the gray waves crashing against the jagged rocks below the cottage. Let it. They want to play the poor, neglected parents card in front of a judge? Let's give them a front row seat to the truth. The war had started, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to hide. The peace of the Maine coast was shattered not by a storm, but by the relentless buzzing of my phone. It started at 6 a.m. Ping, a Facebook notification. My mother had posted a photo of their downsized condo, a perfectly lovely luxury apartment, with a caption that read, "It's heartbreaking when the children you sacrificed everything for turn their backs on you in your golden years. Reaching out for prayers as we navigate this legal tragedy." Ping, a text from Aunt Sarah. "Eleanor, how could you? Your father is under so much stress his blood pressure is through the roof. Just give them the cottage. It's a house, Elle. They're your parents." I sat on the edge of my bed, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. I felt like a deer being circled by a pack of wolves that were somehow also my own blood. They weren't just suing me, they were trying to socially assassinate me. By noon, the flying monkeys were in full force. My cousin sent a link to a local community support page where my parents had shared a GoFundMe for their legal fees against an ungrateful heir. The comments were a vitriolic mess. "Disgraceful," one neighbor wrote. "Kids today have no honor." I walked into the small living room and stared at the stacks of folders Marcus had sent over. My parents' lawyer, a man named Silas Vane, who specialized in family equity, was playing dirty. He was demanding a full inventory of my studio, every tablet, every stylus, every tube of paint. He wanted to prove that I was hoarding assets while my parents starved. I picked up a framed photo of Grandma Rose from the mantel. She was squinting into the sun, her hand on the tiller of a small boat. She had always told me, "Eleanor, some people think the loudest person in the room is the strongest. They're wrong. The strongest person is the one who knows exactly what they're holding." I felt a surge of cold, quiet adrenaline. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I answered. "Eleanor, darling." My mother's voice was sweet, but it had that sharp, metallic edge she used when she was winning. "I hope you're enjoying the view. It's a shame, really.
If you just sign the deed over today, we can make the lawsuit go away. We can tell everyone it was all a big misunderstanding. We can be a family again." "A family?" I asked, my voice steady. "Mom, you're suing me for the cost of my childhood vaccinations. You're charging me for the cereal I ate when I was 10. "We are recouping an investment that failed to pay dividends," she snapped, her mask slipping. "You have 48 hours to decide. After that, we go to the deposition. Do you really want to be humiliated in a room full of lawyers, Eleanor? Think about your reputation as an artist." "I am thinking about it, and I think I'll see you in court." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the thrill of the trap being set. I called Marcus. "Marcus, tell Vane we agree to the full financial disclosure, no redactions, but I want a court reporter present for every second of the deposition. And tell them I'm bringing everything they asked for." I looked at the sleek black laptop on the desk. It looked so innocent. They had no idea that inside that machine was the ledger of a multi-million-dollar empire. They wanted to see my possessions. I was going to show them every single one.
The law office of Vane and Associates was exactly what I expected. All glass, steel, and a view of the city that screamed, "We charge $600 an hour." I sat at the long mahogany table, wearing my most nondescript gray sweater and jeans. Across from me, my parents looked like they were attending a coronation. My mother wore a string of pearls that had been a gift from my grandmother. Ironic, considering she was currently trying to dismantle Grandma's legacy. My father sat with his arms crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips. Silas Vane, their lawyer, clicked his silver pen. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Let's begin," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "The plaintiffs are seeking restitution for years of financial support provided to the defendant, Eleanor Vance, under the documented expectation of future familial stability." He pushed a stack of papers toward me. "We've reviewed your bank statements, Eleanor, or should I say your statement. One checking account with a balance of $4,000, no savings, no 401k, a 10-year-old sedan. Is this really the extent of your assets?" "I live a simple life," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I could see my mother roll her eyes. "Simple is one word for it, pathetic is another. You've been playing at being an artist while we've been struggling. You have a responsibility to this family." Silas Vane leaned forward. "Our discovery request was very specific, Miss Vance. We asked for all intellectual property and business interests, yet you've provided nothing but a few copyright registrations for some digital illustrations. Do you really expect the court to believe you have no other sources of income?" Marcus, sitting beside me, didn't flinch. "My client has provided a list of all businesses registered in her legal name as requested." "Legal name, yes," Vane sneered, "but we've done our homework. We know you spend 14 hours a day on that computer. What are you doing, Eleanor? Playing games? Or are you hiding something?" The pressure in the room was palpable. My mother leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical, motherly tone. "Eleanor, honey, just give us the cottage. We know you can't afford the lawyers. We'll even give you a few $1,000s to help you get a real apartment. Don't make us do this to you in front of a judge." I looked at her, really looked at her. I didn't see a mother. I saw a creditor. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Vane slammed his hand on the table. "Fine, we're done here. We'll see you at the evidentiary hearing. We've already petitioned for a full, unredacted audit of your digital footprint. When the judge sees that you've been wasting your life and hoarding what little you have left of your grandmother's estate, you'll lose everything, not just the cottage, but every cent you have to your name." "Is that what you want?" I asked, looking at my father. "To take every cent I have?"
Every single possession, he replied, his eyes cold. It's only fair, Eleanor. We invested in you. Now we're collecting. I stood up, grabbing my worn backpack. Then I'll see you in court. I hope you're prepared for what you find. As I walked out, I could hear my mother's mocking laughter behind the heavy glass doors. They thought they were the ones setting the trap. They didn't realize they had just finished building their own gallows.
The week leading up to the trial felt like a slow-motion car crash. The Maine fog rolled in thick and heavy, smelling of salt and wet cedar, wrapping the cottage in a gray shroud that matched my mood. I spent most of my time in the studio, a spare bedroom with a single desk and 3 high-end monitors that looked like alien technology against the floral wallpaper. My parents' lawyer had succeeded in getting a court-ordered forensic accountant involved. They thought they were going to catch me hiding a few $1,000s in a PayPal account. They had no idea they were about to open a digital vault. I was sitting on the porch, watching the waves churn against the rocks, when my phone buzzed. It was a link from my cousin. My parents had done a local news interview. I clicked it. There was my father, looking frail in a sweater I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago, standing in front of their modest condo. "We just want what's right," he told the reporter, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "We poured everything into Eleanor. We just want to be able to afford our medical bills. It breaks our hearts that it's come to this." My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "She's hiding behind that cottage while we lose everything. We just want our daughter back and the support we're legally owed." The comment section was a bonfire of hate. "Lock her up," one said. "Ungrateful brat," said another. I put the phone face down on the wooden table. The medical bills were a lie. They had top-tier insurance. The losing everything was just a loss of their country club lifestyle. But the world didn't know that. The world saw a pair of grieving elderly parents and a cold, calculating daughter. Marcus called 10 minutes later. "You saw it?" "Hard to miss," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to me. "They're really going for the throat, Marcus." "They're trying to pressure you into a settlement before tomorrow morning. They know that once the judge sees the numbers, the narrative changes. But Eleanor, are you sure about this? Once that audit is read into the record, the anonymous part of your life is over. The press, the venture capitalists, the long-lost relatives, they'll all be at your door." I looked at the peeling paint on the porch railing. I thought about the cottage and about Grandma Rose, who never cared about status or bank balances. She cared about the truth. "They dragged my name through the mud in public," Marcus said. "I want the truth to come out in public too. I'm tired of being the failed daughter. If they want to sue me for every possession I have, let's show them exactly what those possessions are." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to the house creak. I wasn't afraid of the money. I wasn't even afraid of the judge. I was mourning. I was mourning the parents I thought I had and the relationship that was currently being traded for a shot at a bank account. I packed my bag for the morning, a simple blazer, my tablet, and the original deed to the cottage. The stage was set. Tomorrow, the poor artist was going to have her day in court. The courthouse in Portland was a monolith of gray stone that seemed to swallow the morning light. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the low electric hum of a dozen whispered conversations. I sat at the defense table, my hands tucked into the pockets of my blazer to hide the fact that they were trembling. To my left, Marcus was a calm anchor in a sea of chaos, meticulously arranging his papers. To my right, across the aisle, my parents were a study in calculated grief. My mother wore a modest navy dress and sat with her shoulders slumped,
her hand resting delicately on my father's arm. They looked like the victims of a natural disaster, not two people who had just spent the last month trying to ruin their daughter. In the back row, a local news cameraman adjusted his lens. They had actually done it. They'd turned a family dispute into a public spectacle. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. Judge Miller, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that looked like they could cut through granite, took the bench. She didn't waste time. "We are here for the matter of Vance versus Vance. Mr. Vane, you have the floor for your opening statement regarding the petition for filial support and asset restitution." Silas Vane stood, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a daughter who has forgotten the hands that fed her. Eleanor Vance has spent years living off the generosity of Harold and Margaret Vance. Now, while they face mounting debts and the vulnerabilities of age, she clings to a valuable estate, a property that was only maintained through their indirect financial support over decades." He gestured toward me as if I were a smudge on a clean window. "They aren't asking for wealth. They are asking for what is fair. We are requesting the immediate liquidation of the main property and a full garnishment of the defendant's assets to repay a lifetime of debt." My father let out a soft, practiced sob. I felt a surge of heat crawl up my neck. It wasn't just a lie. It is a performance. "Ms. Vance," the judge looked at me, "do you have anything to say before we move to the evidentiary audit?" I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. "Your Honor, I have never asked my parents for a cent since I was 18. My grandmother left me that cottage because she knew I would cherish it, not because it was an investment. I offered them a place to stay. They chose to sue me instead." "Gratitude isn't something you can litigate, Miss Vance," Vane interjected with a smirk. "But debt is. And according to our forensic audit of your lifestyle, you've been living far beyond your means as a freelance artist, which suggests you've been hoarding family funds." Judge Miller sighed, tapping her pen on the bench. "Enough theater. I have the court-appointed forensic audit here, along with the defendant's full financial disclosure. Let's look at the numbers." The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic scritch-scritch of the court reporter's machine. My mother leaned forward, a hungry look in her eyes. She was already spending the money in her head. The judge opened the thick blue folder. She began to scan the first page, her expression neutral. Then she stopped. She turned to the second page, then the third. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, almost suffocating. Judge Miller looked up, her gaze shifting from the papers to my parents and then finally to me. She adjusted her glasses, a look of profound bewilderment crossing her face. "Mr. Vane," the judge said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register, "did you actually review your client's claims against the defendant's verified income?" "I reviewed the bank statements provided during discovery, Your Honor, a single account with $4,000 balance." "Then you missed a few things, a few very large things." The courtroom felt like it was running out of oxygen. I watched the court reporter's fingers hover over the keys, waiting. My father leaned back, his chest puffed out, a man who thought he was about to collect a winning lottery ticket. My mother was actually smiling at me, a cold, triumphant baring of teeth. "Mr. Vane," Judge Miller said, her voice echoing off the high marble ceiling, "you are suing this woman for $450,000, claiming she is, quote, hoarding family assets while you suffer. Is that correct?" "That is correct, Your Honor," Vane said, preening. "She has been hiding her true financial state to avoid her obligations." "Well," the judge said, a sharp, ironic edge to her tone, "you were right about one thing. She was hiding her financial state, but I don't think it was for the reasons you've alleged. She cleared her throat and began to read from the audit. Eleanor Vance is the sole proprietor and 100% shareholder of Vivid Flow Technologies, registered as a private holding company. According to the certified tax returns and the forensic valuation of her intellectual property, specifically the Vivid Flow design suite, Miss Vance's personal liquid assets total $42 million. The sound that came out of my mother wasn't human. It was a high-pitched, strangled gasp, like air escaping a punctured tire. She clutched her pearls so hard I thought the string would snap. The judge continued, her voice gaining strength. You brought this woman to court to strip her of a small cottage she inherited from her grandmother. You claimed she was a failed investment. You dragged her name through the media as a deadbeat. She slammed the folder shut. This isn't a case about filial support. This is a case of predatory greed. I am dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay for all of the defendants' legal fees and court costs. The gavel hit the wood like a sound of a gunshot. Crack. It was over. But as I stood up, I saw my parents' expressions shift. The shock was being replaced by something even more grotesque. They weren't ashamed, they were hungry. My mother started toward me, her arms reaching out as if to embrace me, a frantic, terrifying smile plastered on her face. Eleanor! Oh, darling, why didn't you tell us? We had no idea you were so successful. We can fix this, honey. We're a family. Let's go to lunch. Let's talk about... I didn't wait for her to finish. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit.
The courthouse hallway was a gauntlet of flashing lights and shouting voices. The news crew that my parents had invited to witness my shaming was now a pack of vultures, their cameras swiveling toward me with predatory hunger. Eleanor! Eleanor, over here! My mother's voice rose above the din, shrill and desperate. I felt the heavy thud of my own heart against my ribs as I pushed through the heavy double doors. I didn't stop until I reached the sidewalk, where the crisp Portland air bit at my cheeks. I could hear them behind me, the frantic clicking of my mother's heels, my father's heavy, wheezing breath. Eleanor, wait, stop! I turned. They were breathless, their faces flushed, not with shame, but with a frantic, terrifying kind of greed. My father reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back, his hand clawing at empty air. We need to talk, honey, he said, his voice trembling with a forced, paternal warmth that made my skin crawl. This was all just a giant misunderstanding. We were stressed. We weren't thinking straight. If we had known you were doing so well, we would have been so proud. We are so proud. Proud? I asked. The word felt like ash in my mouth. You sued me for the cereal I ate when I was 10, Dad? You tried to take the only thing Grandma Rose left me. You called me a failed investment in a room full of strangers. We were desperate, my mother cried, her eyes darting toward the news camera that was now recording every word. She tried to soften her expression, to play the role of the loving mother one last time. We just wanted to be a part of your life, Eleanor. We wanted to be close to you again. Think of the good times. Think of the Christmases, the holidays. I am thinking of them, I interrupted, my voice low and steady. And I'm thinking of how you spent the last year trying to bankrupt me. You didn't want a daughter, you wanted a payout. And now you've realized you just sued the person who could have actually helped you. My mother's face twisted, the mask of affection finally crumbling to reveal the cold calculation beneath. You have $155 million, Eleanor. You can't possibly expect us to live in that cramped apartment while you have all that. It's not fair. We raised you. You owe us. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were small. They were hollow. They were exactly what they had accused me of being, people who valued possessions over souls.
"You said it yourself in court," I said, a cold, calm peace finally settling over me. "You wanted every cent I had. You wanted me to have nothing." I adjusted the strap of my bag and looked my father in the eye. "Now you're going to get exactly what you thought I had. Nothing." I turned and walked away. My father shouted something after me, a curse, a plea. I didn't care to distinguish. I stepped into the waiting car Marcus had called, and as we pulled away, I watched them in the rearview mirror, two small figures standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by the very media circus they had created. 6 months later, the main cottage didn't smell of dust anymore. It smelled of fresh pine, linseed oil, and the salty breeze of a new Atlantic morning. I stood on the newly reinforced porch, watching 3 young artists set up their easels on the lawn. The Rosewood Retreat was officially open, a sanctuary where struggling creators could stay for free, funded entirely by the software that my parents thought was a hobby. The cottage was no longer a liability, it was a legacy. I picked up my coffee, the ceramic mug warm in my hand, and looked out at the horizon. My parents had tried to sue me through every lawyer in the state after the trial, but the dismissed with prejudice ruling was a wall they couldn't climb. They had moved to a smaller town, their reputation in our old circles ruined by their own public greed. I didn't hate them anymore, I just didn't think about them. I sat down in Grandma Rose's old wicker chair, restored now, but still holding the same familiar creak. I opened my laptop, but I didn't look at the stock market or my bank balance. I looked at a new design sketch. For the first time in my life, I wasn't an investment. I wasn't a failure. I was just Eleanor, and that was more than enough.